When I realized I was locked inside my own home, with nothing to eat and no one answering my calls, I felt a cold wave of disbelief wash over me. "You're gonna rot here," my son had shouted before slamming the door. I had never imagined hearing those words from my own flesh and blood. My son, the boy I had held in my arms as a newborn, the boy whose scraped knees I had kissed better more times than I could count, had transformed overnight into someone I didn't recognize. And now, as I pressed my face to the frosted glass of the kitchen door, I realized the truth I was too afraid to admit: he meant them. The house smelled faintly of his cologne, mingled with the lingering aroma of last night's dinner. I could hear the distant hum of traffic outside and the occasional chirp of a sparrow from the backyard. Every familiar sound now felt like a reminder of my own vulnerability. I wandered from room to room, trying doors, checking windows, hoping for some crack of mercy, some accidental oversight that would allow me escape. But every lock clicked the same: cold, deliberate, final. My hands shook as I grabbed my phone from the counter, dialing his number repeatedly. Each time, voicemail. Each time, a rising panic gnawed at my chest. I tried my daughter next. Nothing. My neighbors? No answer. The world outside continued on, oblivious to the nightmare inside my home. I sat on the edge of the sofa, head in my hands, and for the first time in decades, I felt entirely alone. I thought about the conversation 2 weeks ago, casual, harmless, and now seared into my memory. "Mom, I need some time to myself." "Don't worry, everything's fine." He said it with that familiar charm, that half-smile he'd perfected in his 20s. I hadn't questioned it. I trusted him, I always had. And yet here I was, betrayed by the person I thought I knew best. For years, life had been ordinary in the most comforting way. Mornings started with the smell of fresh toast and the faint hiss of the kettle. My husband had passed away a few years ago, leaving me with my 2 children, whom I adored fiercely. My son, Liam, had always been independent, clever, and a little stubborn, traits I quietly admired even when they drove me crazy. My daughter, Clara, was gentle and cautious, always peeking into my world with careful curiosity. Our house was warm, filled with laughter and the occasional argument that ended in hugs and apologies. I had worked part-time at the library, a job that allowed me to balance quiet days with the rhythm of our home. Evenings were spent around the dinner table, sharing stories from our day. Liam would sometimes complain about homework or chores, but mostly he was attentive, respectful, even affectionate. Those little moments, the brushing of a hand against mine when passing in the hallway, the laughter over burnt toast on Sunday mornings, were the foundation of my trust. And that trust had been my undoing. A subtle change had started a week ago. Liam began locking his bedroom door, insisting on privacy. He claimed he was studying, but his eyes darted whenever I passed by. Phone calls went unanswered for hours. There was an edge in his voice I hadn't heard before, polite, but cold. I dismissed it, telling myself teenagers acted out, young adults tested boundaries. But the seed of doubt had been planted. Then came yesterday morning. Liam had rushed out with a backpack and a grin, promising a short trip with friends. I noticed his itinerary on the kitchen counter, a week-long vacation. He waved as he left, kissed my cheek, and whispered, "Mom, don't worry. I've got everything handled." And I believed him. I believed him so completely that I didn't notice the slight smirk as he pulled the door closed behind him. This morning, I awoke to an eerie silence. No knock on the door, no sound of water running, no bustling downstairs. I called his name softly, then louder, until my throat ached. Then the realization: the locks. The cabinets. The fridge. All empty. Not a single note, no explanation, nothing. I sank to the floor, knees pulled to my chest. My mind raced, spiraling through scenarios: accident, prank, misunderstanding. But each rationalization collided with the truth I couldn't ignore: this was no mistake. This was intentional. I ran through the house again, desperate, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, the faint tick of the clock, each sound amplifying the isolation. The shadows seemed deeper, the air heavier. Hunger began to gnaw at my stomach, sharp and insistent. The hours stretched endlessly, and I realized that no one would come for me, not until Liam returned from his carefree escape, leaving me trapped to simmer in the fear and emptiness he had chosen for me. I sank back against the door, tears welling. I whispered to the empty room, "Why, Liam? Why would you do this?" No answer. Only the faint echo of my own voice, swallowed by walls that now felt more like a prison than a home. The first night was the hardest. Darkness settled over the house, thick and unyielding. I curled up on the sofa with a thin blanket, listening to the familiar creaks of the floorboards, each one suddenly sinister. My stomach growled, a dull, relentless reminder of the food I wouldn't have. I tried to ignore it, sipping water sparingly, but the pangs kept returning, sharp and insistent. I thought about calling the police, but hesitation crept in. What will I say? My own son locked me in? The words felt absurd even as I spoke them aloud. Family disputes weren't supposed to reach this level. And yet, here I was, trapped, vulnerable, betrayed in the most intimate way. By morning, I had begun to notice every little detail in the house I'd once taken for granted. The slight stick of the kitchen cabinet hinges, the way the sunlight fell across the carpet, the faint scratch marks on the back of the fridge, reminders that my life had suddenly become a series of obstacles designed to hold me in place. Hunger was now a constant companion, a dull ache that tugged at my attention. I started rationing my water carefully, counting sips, calculating minutes between them. But beyond the physical discomfort, it was the silence that gnawed at me. No voices, no music, no laughter, nothing but the echo of my own thoughts and the occasional sound of a bird landing on the windowsill. My mind cycled through disbelief, anger, sadness, and fear. I imagined Liam on some sunny beach, laughing with friends, carefree, while I shrank inside my own home. The first clue that something was more deliberate than I had initially feared came the second morning. I noticed that the spare key I had hidden under the flower pot near the back door was gone. My fingers trembled as I checked again, feeling around the concrete base, brushing away the soil. It wasn't there. Someone had taken it. I tried not to panic, breathing deeply, telling myself to think logically. And the logical conclusion was impossible to deny. Liam had planned this. He had thought about every detail. I remembered the little hints I had brushed off before, the unusual phone calls he had taken in whispers, the quiet trips to the hardware store last week, the way he had cleaned the house obsessively the night before he left. At the time, I had assumed he was being considerate, mature. Now, those small gestures looked different, sinister almost. The hours crawled. I tried to keep busy, walking from room to room, tidying a little, rearranging books, just to keep my mind occupied. I read old letters I had kept in a drawer, clinging to memories of laughter and comfort. But even that was tinged with bitterness now. How easily trust could be shattered, I thought, and how naive I had been to assume my son would never hurt me. By the third day, hunger had intensified. My head throbbed, my hands shook, and the dry ache in my throat became a constant torment. I tried the kitchen again, opening the cabinets, searching behind containers. I even pried at the refrigerator, hoping I had missed something, a forgotten snack, a hidden bottle of juice. Nothing. And then, in a moment of quiet despair, I realized that this wasn't just a lapse in consideration. This was a punishment, a calculated act of control. I tried reaching out to friends and neighbors, calling numbers I hadn't dialed in years. Many went unanswered. Some answered, and I stammered through explanations, trying to condense the absurdity into something believable. Each call ended with sympathetic murmurs, polite advice, but no immediate help. The isolation tightened around me like a heavy cloak. It was during one of these calls that I began to reflect on my relationship with Liam over the years. I remembered small disagreements, times I had been strict, moments I had scolded him or set boundaries. Perhaps he had held grudges, little resentments that had grown quietly, unnoticed. Could love coexist with this kind of betrayal? My heart ached as I tried to reconcile the boy I had raised with the man who had locked me in. By the evening of the third day, I realized I needed a plan, not just to survive, but to confront the truth. Hunger and fatigue made my movements slow, but my mind sharpened. I started making a mental inventory, windows that could be pried, doors that could be forced, possible points of entry that might allow me to escape. I wasn't helpless, I decided, even if I felt like it. And in that moment, a new feeling began to take root, one I hadn't expected. Anger. Not the explosive kind, but a steady, simmering resolve. Liam had tried to trap me physically, but he hadn't accounted for my determination, my years of patience, of knowing my own home, of knowing him. This wasn't the end of the story. The morning light that filtered through the curtains brought with it a clarity I hadn't felt in days. Hunger still gnawed, my body weak, but my mind was alert, calculating. I couldn't waste another moment in despair. Liam had created a prison for me, but he had underestimated one thing: I knew this house better than he did. Every nook, every latch, every hidden corner was familiar to me. I began with the kitchen window, tugging at the latch, testing its resistance. It was old, a little warped from years of use, and with some careful effort, I managed to create just enough give to squeeze through. My heart pounded as I considered my next steps. I had no food, no plan, only the sharp edge of determination pushing me forward. Outside, the garden smelled faintly of soil and winter air, crisp against my skin, a reminder that life continued beyond these walls, indifferent to my suffering. I decided to make a quick assessment of the situation before acting rashly. I needed to know where Liam was. His phone, his online activity, anything that would tell me whether he was truly on vacation or lying from somewhere nearby. My fingers shook as I logged into his accounts, carefully navigating passwords I knew from years of shared routines and trust. It was as I suspected: flights booked, hotels reserved, friends tagged and photos miles away. He had executed his plan meticulously, leaving no trace of immediate return. That knowledge brought a new wave of anger. Not fear this time, but indignation. How could he treat me like this? How could a son, who had once whispered secrets to me in the dark, now orchestrate my isolation for his convenience? My thoughts swirled with years of suppressed emotions, moments where I had compromised, guided, or even ignored small signs of rebellion. Had I nurtured this sense of entitlement without realizing it? By midday, I had mapped out a strategy. I would survive this. I would reclaim my autonomy, and I would confront him when he returned, not with rage, but with the weight of undeniable truth. I scavenged the pantry one more time, finding a forgotten jar of peanut butter and a few crackers tucked behind cans of beans. It was meager, but sustenance enough to keep my strength for the plan ahead. I ate slowly, savoring each bite, aware that survival was not just physical but mental. In those hours of quiet reflection, I also began documenting everything, every interaction, every absence, every moment that led to this betrayal. My hand ached as I scribbled notes in a notebook, almost compulsively. I wrote about the subtle signs I had ignored, the conversations that now seemed coded with intention, the missed calls, the lies disguised as casual assurances. Each word was a step toward clarity, a way to regain control over a situation that had made me feel powerless. Late in the afternoon, the first real breakthrough came. I noticed a small discrepancy in his booking. A hotel review had been posted under his account an hour before his flight supposedly departed. My stomach sank as I realized that part of the vacation had been fabricated. He had wanted me to think he was away while leaving the house empty, but he might have been monitoring, observing, calculating. The betrayal deepened. Not only had he locked me in, but he had toyed with my perception of reality, manipulating both space and time to assert control. I began rehearsing the confrontation in my mind, imagining what I would say, how I would stand, how I would ensure that he understood the gravity of his actions. But beneath the anger, there was sorrow. Sorrow for the innocence lost, for the mother-son bond fractured by deliberate cruelty. I remembered nights when he had cried into my shoulder, days when he had run to me for comfort. Those memories were now bitter, tinged with the irony of the person he had become. As evening fell, I realized I needed an external perspective. I called my daughter, Clara, her voice a lifeline through the receiver. I explained everything calmly, avoiding panic. She was horrified, her words quick, filled with a mixture of disbelief and concern. She promised to come over the next morning with supplies and support. For the first time since being locked in, I felt the faintest flicker of hope. Perhaps I wasn't entirely alone. Still, the question lingered, why? Why would a son, raised with love, nurtured and guided, choose to isolate his mother, to let her hunger, to impose a punishment that served no apparent purpose beyond selfish convenience? I turned the question over and over in my mind, searching for an answer that might make sense. I knew, deep down, that understanding might never come. Sometimes people hurt the ones they love most not out of malice, but out of thoughtlessness, immaturity, or a need to assert independence in the cruelest way. Night arrived, and with it, the second night of entrapment. Hunger clawed harder, fatigue made every movement laborious, but my resolve remained. I set the notebook beside me, planning my next actions with precision. Tomorrow, I would see Clara. Tomorrow, the world would know. Tomorrow, Liam would face consequences, not through vengeance, but through truth. The morning sun spilled weakly through the blinds, cutting stripes of light across the floor like bars of a cage. I had slept fitfully, curled on the sofa, stomach empty, mind racing with strategy and dread. When Clara arrived, her face pale with worry, I felt both relief and a renewed wave of sorrow. She hugged me tightly, murmuring reassurances, but I could sense her anger simmering beneath the surface. I knew she was already imagining the confrontation, the consequences, the explanations we would demand. Clara didn't need much coaxing to help me pry the remaining cabinets and cupboards. Together, we scoured the kitchen, uncovering a few stale crackers and a half-empty bottle of juice. It was meager, but it restored a little energy and, more importantly, a sense of solidarity. My daughter had always been perceptive, more cautious than Liam, more attuned to the subtle currents of human behavior. Her presence steadied me, gave me the courage to face what was inevitable. By mid-morning, I had called the neighbors and a trusted family friend, explaining the situation clearly. The story began to spread, cautiously at first, then more insistently as people realized that my son had deliberately imprisoned me. I could feel a shift in the atmosphere, the air charged with the tension of moral outrage. It wasn't revenge I sought, it was acknowledgement, the recognition that betrayal carries weight. And then came the moment of truth. Liam returned. He strolled in with his usual swagger, a tan from his vacation evident on his face, a grin playing at the corners of his mouth. But the grin faltered the instant he saw the group assembled in the living room: Clara, our neighbor Mr. Patel, and me. The house that had once felt oppressive now seemed to pulse with a quiet strength, a collective gaze that demanded explanation. I didn't think Liam began, but I held up a hand, stopping him mid-sentence. You locked me in, Liam, I said, my voice calm but carrying the weight of exhaustion, fear, and betrayal. You left me without food, without water, without a single note. You told me I'd rot here. Tell me, why? He faltered, shifting his weight, his eyes avoiding mine. I just needed time to myself. I didn't mean. Time to yourself? I interrupted, voice steady now, infused with the gravity of every day I had spent trapped, rationing water, counting the hours. Do you think starving your mother, the woman who raised you, is a way to take time for yourself? Do you think this is acceptable? Do you even realize what you've done? Clara stepped forward, her hands clenched. It's not just selfishness, Liam. It's cruel. Mom trusted you. You betrayed that trust in the worst possible way. Liam swallowed hard. He opened his mouth, then closed it, struggling for words. I watched him carefully, noting the subtle flicker of guilt, the tightening of his jaw. Even in his arrogance, there was fear now, the first real fear he had felt in this situation. I didn't know what else to do, he admitted finally, voice small. I thought it would be easier for both of us. I shook my head slowly, exhaling a long, steadying breath. You thought locking me in, starving me, isolating me, would make life easier? Do you even hear yourself? He looked down, ashamed. The room was silent except for the faint ticking of the clock. I realized then that Liam had crossed a boundary not just of respect but of morality. He had underestimated the consequences of his actions, underestimated the bonds that hold family together even when frayed. Clara and I recounted the days of confinement, the fear, the hunger, the isolation. Each detail weighed heavily on him, and I watched as comprehension finally broke through his defense. I didn't need to scream, didn't need to cry. The truth itself was enough. I'm sorry, he whispered, almost inaudibly. I didn't mean for it to go that far. Intent doesn't erase impact, Liam, I said softly. You need to understand that. Trust isn't rebuilt with words alone. It's rebuilt with actions, humility, and a willingness to face the consequences of what you've done. Mr. Patel nodded solemnly, his gaze steady. This is a lesson, Liam. Not just for you, but for everyone here. Actions have weight. People have limits. Respect those limits. Liam's shoulders sagged. For the first time in years, I saw the boy I had raised, vulnerable and scared, realizing the gravity of his choices. But even in that moment, I reminded myself, the focus was not on vengeance. It was on accountability. On truth. The days that followed were tense, but they marked the beginning of a reckoning. Liam was forced to confront the weight of his actions not just through words, but through the quiet, steady gaze of those he had wronged. Clara and I stayed by my side, supporting each other as he navigated the discomfort of responsibility. I wanted him to understand fully that this wasn't just a mistake to apologize for and move past, but a violation of trust that demanded reflection and change. I began by setting boundaries. Liam had free rein of the house before, now, he was to earn trust step by step. Meals became a shared responsibility. He cooked for us, cleaned, repaired small things around the house he had once neglected. Each action was a small test, a demonstration that he could choose care over selfishness. At first, his movements were hesitant, almost mechanical, but over time, the weight of accountability seemed to settle in, making him deliberate, thoughtful. I also made it clear that he had to apologize personally to those who had been indirectly affected, neighbors who had checked in, family friends who had worried, Clara who had carried part of the burden with me. Writing letters was one of the first exercises I assigned him, and as he put pen to paper, I watched the layers of denial and arrogance peel away. The words were raw, sometimes stilted, but they were real. He was beginning to internalize the impact of his choices. Yet, no matter how contrite he became, there were still moments of tension. I found myself observing him closely, listening for the familiar edge of defensiveness, the subtle cues that might suggest lingering resentment. I realized that forgiveness didn't come instantly. It was a process, a negotiation between memory and the present. And while I wanted to forgive him, I needed to ensure he understood the true depth of his betrayal. One afternoon, while he was working in the garden, I approached him slowly. Liam, I said gently, do you understand why what you did was wrong? He paused, gloves in hand, eyes cast downward. Yes, Mom, he said, voice barely above a whisper. I see it now. I was cruel, and I was selfish. I didn't think about how it would make you feel. I don't know. I thought I was just taking space for myself, but I see it now. I nodded, the corners of my mouth softening. Space for yourself does not come at the cost of someone else's safety and dignity. That's the lesson you need to carry with you for the rest of your life. Over the next few weeks, Liam continued to demonstrate his commitment to change. He repaired the loose floorboards in the hallway, repainted the scuffed walls in the kitchen, and even volunteered at the local food bank, an act that surprised him as much as it did me. The physical labor, the deliberate acts of service, seemed to teach him humility in a way words could not. And then came the moment of real reflection. One evening, we sat together in the living room, Clara on the sofa beside me, Liam on the armchair across from us. The house smelled faintly of dinner, a roasted chicken Clara had prepared while Liam had set the table carefully, almost ceremoniously. The atmosphere was calm, but heavy with unspoken acknowledgement. "I want to make sure you understand something, Liam," I said quietly. "This isn't about punishment anymore. It's about awareness. It's about understanding the consequences of your choices, even when the intent behind them isn't malicious. Actions have a ripple effect, even small ones, and sometimes they can cause harm we never anticipated." He nodded solemnly, and I could see him absorbing the lesson not just as words, but as lived experience. The first spark of true empathy I had seen since the incident was flickering back to life in his eyes. I realized then that the betrayal, as painful as it had been, had created a rare opportunity, the chance for him to learn, to grow, and to rebuild his character from a place of accountability rather than entitlement. That night, I lay in bed reflecting on the past week. Fear, hunger, and isolation had been my teachers, as much as they had been trials. And through it all, I had discovered the quiet strength that comes not from avoiding betrayal, but from facing it with dignity, reflection, and measured action. Liam had made a mistake of monumental impact, but he was learning that life demanded responsibility, empathy, and the courage to face one's own failures. Word of what had happened began to circulate quietly through our neighborhood. At first, it was hushed whispers, sympathetic glances when I stepped outside, and neighbors checking in with small gestures, a loaf of bread left on the porch, a quick call to make sure I was safe. But soon, the story gained traction, and people started to realize the deliberate nature of Liam's actions. I never sought attention or sympathy, but truth has a way of demanding acknowledgement. Mr. Patel, who had been a neighbor for decades, approached Liam one morning as he mowed the lawn. "You need to understand that your actions were not just a private matter," he said firmly, "and hiding behind youth or immaturity doesn't excuse the harm you've caused. The community knows, and it's up to you to show that you can do better." Liam lowered his head, shame evident, but there was also resolve. He apologized again, quietly but sincerely, to neighbors he had wronged indirectly through his recklessness, friends who had worried, people who had offered help and had been brushed aside. Each apology was met with cautious acceptance. People didn't forget easily, but they appreciated the honesty and effort. At work, I noticed subtle changes in how colleagues treated him. A few had heard through the grapevine, small-town news travels fast, and while none were cruel or vindictive, the awareness of his actions seemed to follow him. He couldn't simply return to normal routines without acknowledging what had happened, without demonstrating genuine responsibility. And he did. Slowly, with quiet, steady determination. Social media added another layer. Friends and extended family reached out to offer support, to express concern, and some even gently chastised Liam. He took it with a humility that surprised him as much as it did me. I could see him grappling with the weight of public accountability, learning firsthand that actions, especially ones that harm those closest to you, rarely remain private. Through it all, Clara and I remained a source of grounding. We never sought to shame him publicly, our goal was to help him internalize the consequences. We encouraged reflection, honesty, and small gestures of reparation, making amends in a way that was tangible and sincere. Whether it was cooking meals, helping elderly neighbors, or volunteering in the community, Liam began to rebuild his reputation slowly, piece by piece. And yet, I realized something crucial: the public consequences were only part of the lesson. The true reckoning was internal. Liam had to confront the kind of person he wanted to be, the values he wanted to embody, and the reality that his actions had real, lasting impact. I could guide, advise, and support, but the transformation had to come from him. One evening, after a particularly long day of volunteering, Liam came into the kitchen where I was preparing tea. He hesitated, then said softly, "Mom, I understand now. Not just about locking you in, but about the trust I've broken, the fear I caused. I don't expect forgiveness yet. I just want you to know I'm trying to be better. I looked at him, really looked, and saw a depth of remorse that was genuine, not performative. I nodded, letting the silence carry the weight of what had passed and the possibility of what could come. No words could undo the past, but actions, sustained, deliberate, compassionate actions, could pave the way toward healing. Even in the quiet of our home, the subtle acknowledgement of accountability had a ripple effect. Liam learned humility. The community learned that even small households can harbor extraordinary stories of human error and redemption. And I, despite the trauma and betrayal, learned the resilience that comes from confronting pain directly, from insisting on truth, and from holding space for growth even when it comes from the person who hurt you most. Weeks turned into months, and slowly, the house began to feel like home again, not just a physical space, but a place of restored trust and careful reconciliation. Liam continued his quiet work around the house, fixing small things, helping with chores, volunteering in the community. Each act wasn't flashy or performative, it was consistent, deliberate, a demonstration that he was taking responsibility for the harm he had caused. Clara and I observed, offering gentle guidance rather than constant oversight. It was a delicate balance, allowing him to rebuild autonomy while ensuring he truly understood the impact of his choices. Slowly, the tension that had hung over our home began to ease. Laughter returned, hesitant at first, but genuine. Conversations resumed around the kitchen table, now tinged with both caution and warmth. For my part, I found healing in reflection and in small, intentional acts. I started journaling more, documenting not just the betrayal and its aftermath, but also the resilience and lessons that emerged from it. I reconnected with friends I had neglected, shared quiet moments with neighbors, and allowed myself to feel gratitude for the support and solidarity that had surrounded me. One evening, as Liam and I sat on the porch watching the sun dip behind the trees, he spoke softly. "Mom, I know I can't undo what I did. I hope I can be someone who earns your trust again, step by step." I reached out, resting my hand on his. "Liam, trust isn't given blindly. It's earned, and it takes time. But I see your effort, and I see the sincerity in your actions. That's how we rebuild, not with words, but with consistent care, awareness, and respect." He nodded, a weight visibly lifting from his shoulders. I realized then that reconciliation doesn't mean forgetting the betrayal, nor does it mean erasing the lessons learned. It means acknowledging the pain, understanding the responsibility, and choosing a path forward that honors growth rather than resentment. As days passed, I noticed subtle changes not just in him, but in myself. The fear and helplessness that had defined the first week of confinement gradually loosened its grip. I slept better, ate without anxiety, and allowed myself to trust again, cautiously, mindfully, but truly. The house smelled like home once more, filled with the faint aroma of meals shared, of quiet conversation, of repaired bonds. Looking back, I could see the moral thread woven through the ordeal. Betrayal can arrive unexpectedly, even from those we love most. But it also brings an opportunity to assert dignity, to insist on accountability, and to witness the possibility of transformation when responsibility is taken seriously. Pain, though unavoidable, can become a teacher, guiding us toward empathy, resilience, and the strength to rebuild relationships on firmer ground. Clara and I often talk quietly about that week, not to dwell, but to remember what we survived and what we learned. Liam, too, reflects in his own way, often silently, sometimes sharing moments of insight or humility that signal he is truly growing. The house, once a site of fear and betrayal, has become a place of renewed connection and cautious optimism. As I sit here now, sipping tea on the porch, I reflect on everything that has passed, the fear, the hunger, the isolation, and the slow, deliberate path toward understanding and reconciliation. The experience left scars, yes, but it also left lessons. That trust is fragile, that actions carry weight far beyond what we anticipate, and that even the deepest betrayals can be met with accountability, reflection, and growth. I look at Liam now, helping Clara with dinner in the kitchen. There's a quiet humility in his movements, a softness in his voice that wasn't there before. He's not perfect, he will never be, but he is learning, slowly, that respect and care are not optional, especially toward those who love you unconditionally. And that, perhaps, is the most powerful lesson of all. Life moves on, and so do we. The house is no longer a prison but a sanctuary, a place where mistakes are acknowledged, and efforts to make amends are valued. I have learned to forgive, cautiously but sincerely, while maintaining the boundaries that protect my dignity. The experience taught me the depth of my own resilience, the power of family to grow even from fracture, and the importance of facing betrayal with both courage and calm. I share this story not for pity, not for drama, but as a reflection on the complexities of love, trust, and family. Would you have had the strength to confront someone you love, someone who hurt you deeply, with both honesty and measured compassion? Could you hold them accountable without letting anger define you? These are questions I leave for you to ponder. If my story resonated with you, consider supporting the channel and sharing your thoughts, because every story has a lesson, and sometimes, the hardest lessons teach us the most about who we are. Thank you for listening, for staying with me through the fear, the pain, and the eventual healing. May your own relationships be guided by patience, reflection, and the courage to act with both love and integrity.